Yeah. Are you able to see now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Before I start this, I'd like to say that we have lost one of the real great anesthesiologists of my time, Professor A.K. Mrinalini, was former HOD of pediatric anesthesia in ICH. She was trained under Professor T. Srinivasan of Stanley. Then she was in KMC. Then she came to us. She was with us for almost 8 years. We lost a great soul last week. So that is why I changed our WhatsApp group into the Professor AKM. I want to have it as AKM Memorial. So all my classes will be, it'll be some kind of a memorial for my madam. Okay. With that thought, we'll start today's class. So today we are going to talk about metabolic alkalosis. I'll just recap what we have done previously. Alkalemia is hydrogen concentration below 36 nanomoles or a pH above 7.44. And we saw if it's going to be metabolic alkalosis, we said all the arrows maintain in the same direction. So in metabolic alkalosis, the main problem is going to be a rise in bicarbonate. So there's a rise in pH. Whenever there's going to be a rise in bicarbonate, it is going to depress the lung. So the compensation is going to be depression of lung and rise in PCO2. So this is how it's going to happen in any case of metabolic alkalosis. The causes are mainly two types. One is hypovolemia with chloride depletion, that is called as saline responsive or chloride responsive metabolic alkalosis. And another is classical with volume overloaded saline non-responsive metabolic alkalosis, which we'll see in detail. We said compensation is the body's response to a pathophysiological process which produces a change in serum pH. So compensation for metabolic disorder will be a brain senses a change in pH, adjusts the ventilation. In today's class, we are having metabolic alkalosis. So it is a metabolic problem. The brain senses the change in pH, which is going to be alkalotic, and it depresses the brain or respiratory system to decrease the rate and tidal volume so that the PCO2 increases. So the compensation formula for metabolic alkalosis is we expect a rise in PCO2. The compensation formula is going to be 0.9 into bicarb plus 16. So if you do this, what you get is an expected rise in PCO2. And what we see in the ABG slip is a measured PCO2. We compare both. If both are same, we call it as a primary disorder. If there's a major difference between the expected and the measured value, we call it as either two primary disorders, or sometimes it could be a overcompensated buffering. Okay? Whenever we have a metabolic problem, we always check the base excess. In metabolic alkalosis, DE and ABG slip will always be positive. So these are the steps we say. Whenever you are given an APG slip in the exams, first thing you ask is history. Don't just go and read the ABG slip. Please see the history and see any physical finding they are given. First step will be check the pH, find out whether it is acidic or alkaline. Then check the PCO2, find out whether it's a respiratory problem or a metabolic problem. Then based on what is the problem, use a compensation formula and try to find out whether it's a mixed disorder. I request others to kindly mute your audio because it will be disturbing to the others. Okay. So this is the steps that we are going to see. So now I'll call, we have 4 speakers today. We have 4 speakers today. I think there are a lot of echoes here. Is it clear? Audio is clear?
It's echoing, sir.
I think somebody is keeping the mobile near the set. Now it is okay?
No, sir, it's still there.
It's still there. I request everyone to mute. So only let the speaker alone have the video and audio. Now are you able to see the screen?
Yes, sir.
But there's a lot of echo. Just hold on and check it out.
Okay, sir.
Dr. Kritika?
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir.
Yeah, you can start now.
Yes, sir. Good evening, all. I'm Dr. Kritika from Chengalpet Medical College. It's a pleasure to meet you all again. Here, sir has given me one case history along with ABG. I'm going to interpret the patient, case history, physical examination, and ABG, and I'm going to help you find the probable diagnosis. We have a 2-month-old baby with projectile non-bilious vomiting. On examination, baby had 10% of dehydration, and on palpating abdomen, we could palpate a mass of 2 into 2 centimeter in the upper abdomen. And this is the ABG we got. pH of 7.48, PCO2 45, PO2 90, base excess is +1, sodium 128, potassium 3.2, chloride 80, bicarbonate is 28. Now we are going to interpret this ABG by step. First, we have to catch up with the history and physical examination, and then check the pH for the primary problem, whether it is metabolic or whether it is acidosis, acidemia or alkalemia. And third one is check the PCO2. Fourth, use compensation formula to get predictor values. And fifth, check for any mixer disorders. Sixth, use of serum electrolytes. And seventh, if it is a metabolic acidosis, we have to find the anion gap and delta ratio. So here again the history and physical examination. We had an infant with dehydration and a mass. So first, coming to the pH, it is 7.48. The normal pH is from 7.35 to 7.44. It is more than 7.44. So it is alkalemic. It could be metabolic or respiratory. The third step, PCO2 is 45. Normal PCO2 is still 40 millimeters of mercury. It is more than 40. So it could be metabolic alkalosis or respiratory acidosis. But we had positive more than 7.44 pH. So along with this PCO2 more than 40, it is metabolic alkalosis. Compensation formula to get predicted values. The expected rise in PCO2 is equal to 0.9 into bicarb plus 16. So we get 41.2 because the bicarbonate value was 28. So 0.9 into 28 plus 16, we get 41.2. So the predicted PCO2 is 41.2. Measured PCO2 was 45. Here measured PCO2 is more than predicted PCO2. So the compensation is more. So additional respiratory acidosis is there. So with ABG and history and physical examination, metabolic alkalosis with respiratory acidosis. This is the ABG report with the overcompensation of respiratory acidosis. Then we come to serum electrolytes now. Sodium is 128. It is less than 135. So we get hyponatremia. Potassium is 3.2. It is less than 3.5. So hypokalemia. Chloride is 80. It is less than 96. So hypochloremia. So hyponatremic, hypochloremic, hypokalemic metabolic alkalosis with compensatory respiratory acidosis. So combining all these history with physical examination and ABG report, 8 weeks old child. So this is the age is one clue with projectile non-bilious vomiting. So the obstruction is above the opening of the bile duct, second part of duodenum, with dehydration. With so the vomiting is severe with the mass in upper abdomen. We could palpate a mass with ABG suggestive of hyponatremic, hypochloremic, hypokalemic metabolic alkalosis with compensatory respiratory acidosis is most probably a case of infantile hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. These are the other causes, but in all these GERD, pylorospasm, preampullary duodenal obstruction, high intestinal obstruction, these are the causes with regard to the age at the presentation. But we won't be getting any mass in the abdomen in these causes. Here, why we got overcompensation of respiratory acidosis? Because already the PCO2 is high. The brain won't compensate by hyperventilation because the hypoxia has to stimulate the respiratory centers to hyperventilate. Here we have PO2 of 90. So till hypoxia, till the baby gets hypoxia, the PCO2 will be rising till 55 millimeters of mercury at the max. Thank you. Sir?
Thank you, Dr. Kritika, for an excellent presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, this is just to tell you that ABG is one more diagnostic tool. So you don't just read the ABG alone, see the history, see the clinical findings, then come to the ABG. Why we are doing this ABG is we want to know whether we are missing any other problem, because all patients will not just have a single disease alone when they come to the ICU. So that is the importance of knowing the ABG. Now she has said about a metabolic alkalosis case. Now we already said there are two types of metabolic alkalosis. One is a saline responsive, another is a saline non-responsive. This pyloric stenosis is a saline responsive metabolic alkalosis. So next speaker will give you an idea about what do you mean by saline responsive and how to manage the saline response. Now, are you able to see the screen now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Sindhuja from MMC will talk in detail about what is exactly metabolic alkalosis, saline response. Why I have selected this particular topic is IHPS is an exam machine, and lots of now they have started asking the short notes, metabolic alkalosis, metabolic acidosis, respiratory alkalosis, all those things. And this will come even in the afternoon session in your ABG station. I request Dr. Sindhuja to talk about metabolic alkalosis, chloride responsive. Yes, doctor.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about metabolic alkalosis, of which I'll be talking more about the chloride responsive or saline responsive type. So, how are we going to see this? Like metabolic alkalosis, we'll be discussing in various headings like introduction, definition of it, how do we classify it, and before going to the pathophysiology, I'll be talking more about the bicarbonate transport in kidney, and then the clinical manifestation, treatment, and the anesthetic implications in metabolic alkalosis. So, since the spotlight is more on the metabolic acidosis, we usually miss this metabolic alkalosis, which is the most common acid-base disturbance in the hospitalized patient. Why is it so? Why is it more prevalent? The reasons or the factors could be because it is the common predisposing conditions like diuretic therapy, the ability of this alkalosis to sustain itself because of the chloride, or this tendency for the condition to get unnoticed and untreated. And it is more important because the mortality rate of 45% in patients with pH of more than 7.55 and 80% when the pH is more than 7.65. So by definition, so the arterial pH will be more than 7.44, that is alkalemia, because there is increase in the bicarbonate level, and it could be more than 26 milliequivalent per liter, which should not be an adaptive response to the hypercapnia. And because of this, we have the compensatory mechanism happening, which causes hypoventilation, and hence there could be a secondary response like increase in PaCO2. So metabolic alkalosis is more of two types. One is the chloride responsive or the chloride depleted state, which responds well to the saline therapy. And the other one is the chloride resistant type, which is chloride expansion state, where it doesn't respond with the chloride therapy alone, but it requires more of potassium therapy and all that. So chloride responsive, what could be the causes? See, the first cause could be, which is already, we have got a case scenario where the infant has a projectile non-bilious vomiting. So vomiting is the first cause, where there is GI loss of hydrogen ion. And also the other cause could be gastric suctioning. The Ryle's tube suctioning can cause loss of HCl, which can result in the alkalosis. And the other causes are villus adenoma, which is a chloride losing diarrhea, where the chloride-rich fluid is lost. The other renal cause could be the use of loop diuretics and thiazide diuretics. This is the hypovolemic state with chloride depletion. The other thing could be hypervolemia with chloride causes could be because of renal loss of hydrogen ion, that is the edematous status like heart failure, cirrhosis, nephrotic syndrome, hyperaldosteronism, hypercortisolism, excess ACTH, exogenous steroids, and hyperenemia, and severe hypokalemia, renal artery stenosis, bicarbonate administration. So those were the causes of metabolic alkalosis, and also we have few other causes which could be which could cause a transient base excess or loading, which usually happens while correcting a metabolic acidosis. We tend to load the patient with more soda bicarb. So it could be oral or IV infusion of soda bicarb, or the other equivalents like a citrate in the transfused blood in case of massive transfusion or the FFP transfusion. The other thing could be after successful treatment of ketoacidosis or lactic acidosis, which are usually metabolized to bicarbonate, resulting in increase in bicarbonate level in plasma. The other could be after successful correction of hypercapnia in respiratory acidosis before the kidney can excrete the bicarb, which was there for compensation. So this slide is more important because here the bicarbonate transport in kidney is more important, which is the cause for this metabolic alkalosis. Normally, the bicarb is filtered filtered in the glomerulus will be reabsorbed in the proximal tubule. That is majority of it, 90% of it will be reabsorbed in the proximal tubule, and the remaining would be reabsorbed in the specialized cells in the collecting duct. So here is it. Here the bicarbonate reabsorption occurs. The first thing is the hydrogen ion along with the chloride will enter the tubular lumen where it will combine with the bicarbonate and form carbonic acid, and this will split into water and carbon dioxide, which will enter into the cell, and there the carbonic anhydrase would split it into H plus and bicarbonate. Here the bicarbonate is reabsorbed into the capillaries, and the chloride will be pushed into the cell. So the chloride and the hydrogen ion will go on to the next cycle, and this will cause reabsorption of bicarbonate. This normally occurs, and when there is a chloride, and this picture shows how the bicarbonate is secreted when there is metabolic alkalosis. This thing usually does not occur normally. It occurs only when there is a metabolic alkalosis. So here the important thing would be the spendrin anion exchange protein, which plays a major role in the bicarbonate excretion. Here it would be the reverse of the previous, where the ATPase, the pump is located on the capillary side, which pushes the chloride and the hydrogen ion out of the cell, so that the hydrogen can combine with the bicarb, and this way the bicarbonate would enter as carbon dioxide and water into the cell, and it will be split back to hydrogen and bicarb, and the bicarb would be secreted by the spendrin protein with exchange for the chloride. Here the chloride in the intraluminal plays a major role, because when there is a chloride depletion here in intraluminally, this would cause more this would increase the bicarbonate reabsorption by secreting more chlorides into the lumen, and also this would affect the spendrin protein, so that the activity of the spendrin protein will come down, resulting in decreased bicarb secretion with increased bicarbonate reabsorption. This is the major cause for the metabolic alkalosis. So pathophysiology of chloride depletion metabolic alkalosis. Here it is the generation and the maintenance which causes the metabolic alkalosis, which we have already told. Here the vomiting results in loss of the gastric HCl. So the hydrogen ion and chloride both are lost. Hence, this loss in the hydrogen ion directly causes metabolic alkalosis. The reason would be the bicarbonate, which is produced for the neutralization of the HCl, would enter the circulation, causing metabolic alkalosis. And the other thing would be, because of vomiting, there would be dehydration, and the CSF volume contraction would occur, which in turn will stimulate the renin-angiotensin system, and this would result in the increased sodium absorption, and this would result in since the chloride levels are low, with the sodium, the bicarb would be reabsorbed more, resulting in metabolic alkalosis. These three causes we have already dealt. One is the loss of gastric acid. The next would be the diuretic use, which results in potassium and chloride depletion. And the other thing would be the which I've already told, which is the contraction alkalosis, which is nothing but the loss of fluid with high chloride and low bicarb concentration. The next thing would be maintenance. The maintenance is purely due to the impairment in the renal bicarb excretion, which is the secretion has come down because of the decreased chloride level intraluminally. The other causes could be hypokalemia, aldosterone excess, the volume contracted state. So the clinical manifestation would be the patient will have confusion, decreased level of consciousness, irritable state, and he'll be more when the loss is more, he will end up in lethargy. And also the patient will have dysarrhythmias and tremors, muscle cramps, tingling of fingers, toes, and hypokalemia. How do we diagnose? The first and foremost is the careful history and physical examination of the patient, which gives the 50% of our diagnosis. The next would be the ABG, which shows the increase in pH, increase in bicarb, and the compensatory rise in PaCO2. And even without the ABG, we could come to diagnosis with the high anion gap and high bicarb level in the serum with low potassium and chloride levels. The other primary tool for diagnosis would be the urinary chloride estimation, which helps us to know the diagnosis and treatment, which is based on the diagnosis. So the urinary chloride level, if it is less than 15 milliequivalent per liter, it is more of chloride depleted state, which is chloride responsive or saline responsive metabolic alkalosis. The chloride level more than 20 milliequivalent says it is chloride resistant type, or the chloride, the potassium responders. So the treatment will be based on the CSF volume status. When there is a CSF and chloride deficit, the isotonic 0.9% sodium chloride will correct both. When there is overt volume contraction, 3 to 5 liters of 150 milliequivalent of sodium chloride will be the treatment. When this ECF is normal, but the chloride is deficit, we have to calculate the total body chloride deficit, that is 0.2 into body weight into the desired increments in the plasma chloride level. And based on this, we have to replace a chloride along with replacing the continuing loss of fluids and electrolyte. Volume overloaded state, we can't do the same. Hence, the chloride deficit should be corrected along with KCl, along with potassium chloride, unless there is hyperkalemia. With the case scenario today, we have discussed for metabolic alkalosis, saline responsiveness, infantile hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. Here, the child will be dehydrated, hypochloremic, hypokalemic, and alkalotic at the presentation. So it is more of medical emergency to correct these dyselectrolemia than doing a surgery first. So we have to optimize the child and then take her for the definitive treatment of surgery. So initial resuscitation would be with IV bolus of 10 to 20 ml per kg of 0.445% of isotonic sodium chloride in 5 to 10% dextro. In one school of thought says 5D in 0.25 NS at 1.5 to 2 times the maintenance would be the initial resuscitation. Once the output is adequate, that is 2 ml per kg per hour, we could add the potassium chloride as 30 to 50 milliequivalent in the maintenance dose, because most of these child will be in hypokalemic state even after correction. So how do we say how far is the treatment of metabolic alkalosis can be told with these values? That is a resolution of metabolic alkalosis. Only then we can take the child for definitive management. The child would have got a normal skin target. The chloride level should be at least more than 85 millimole per liter. The bicarbonate level should have come down less than 30 millimole. and sodium level should have raised up more than 130 millimole per liter, and the potassium should be more than 3 millimole per liter. And then we can take up the child for definitive management, which is pyloromyotomy. The other the treatment, this is for completion's sake, could be intravenous HCl, hydrochloric acid, because this is indicated when the sodium chloride or KCl cannot be given, or when the correction needs to be immediately done when the arterial pH is more than 7.55, or in the presence of hepatic encephalopathy, cardiac arrhythmias, digitalis toxicity, or altered mental status. Here, the HCl is given as 0.1 or 0.25 mole solution. So this was the formula to be calculated and given. This is mostly given in the central venous axis, preferably in large tributary veins. The rate of infusion would be up to 25 milliequivalent per hour. When the correction is to be given through a peripheral line, we can go for ammonium chloride, but the rate should not be more than 30 milliequivalent per 24 hours. And this is contraindicated when there is a presence of renal or hepatic insufficiency. If GFR is adequate, we can even use acetazolamide 250 to 500 mg daily, which causes diuresis by inhibiting the carbonic anhydrase. If kidney is not responding to any of these therapies, the dialysis could be done to remove the bicarbonate and replenish the chloride. This could be done with the reduction of the gastric HCl with PPI can be done when there is pernicious vomiting, or when we have to continue removal of the gastric secretions despite the metabolic alkalotic state, or when to blunt the acid loss that occurs by the gastrocystoplasty. Thank you. So the anesthetic implications, why are we more worried about the metabolic alkalosis? Because the metabolic alkalosis, which this could be due to dehydration, which also causes hypokalemia, and this the body tries to compensate by hypoventilation, which could result in hypoxia, which would be detrimental to the patient. And also this alkalotic state will shift the ODC curve to left, so this could result in tissue hypoxia. So the overventilation of a patient with chronic respiratory failure can also result in acute metabolic alkalosis, which should be looked upon. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sindhuja. It's a nice presentation, because normally we talk, as she said, we talk more about metabolic acidosis, but we rarely talk about metabolic alkalosis. And one of the commonest pediatric cases, pyloric stenosis, and there are other conditions like a villus, small villi in the bowel which secretes chloride. They also produce this alkalosis. And the main important thing that you should know is, whenever the chloride is lost, the body, the renal content or GFR content of chloride is less. When GFR content of chloride is less, the sodium has to be absorbed. For sodium, which is a positive, it requires chloride, which is a negative, for absorption. When that negative chloride is not available, bicarb gets absorbed. So when the bicarb gets absorbed, the patient goes in for metabolic alkalosis. So how do you correct that? How do you give chloride to the patient? We normally give it sodium chloride. It could be a full strength 0.9 or half strength, depending upon the patient's condition and the patient electrolyte level. Okay. Now recently they have started giving hydrochloric acid, which I don't have a personal experience on that. And ammonium chloride is also rarely given. So that is the reason why we have asked them to present. Now, this particular topic is open for discussion. So I request all the participants to take active part, ask their questions. You can give you would have read something, you can comment, or you can give your opinions. This is a small group discussion, self-directed learning. So unless you open out, talk, or go learn again, it is very difficult to learn just by a didactic lecture. So the session is now open. And if she knows the answer, she will tell you the answer. Otherwise, she'll tell you the next week. And you can also tell the correct answer if you really know it. Thank you. You can start the discussion. I request the participants to participate. Participants are only there to participate. If you're not asking anything, that means only two things. One is that you understood everything. Second is that you are not understood anything at all. So if there are no more questions, so we'll go to the next topic. That is another type of metabolic alkalosis. Okay. So thank you, Dr. Sindhuja.
Thank you, sir.
Now we'll go to the next speaker. Dr. Apurva. She will before Dr. Apurva, Dr. Nandakumar will discuss an ABG slip. Dr. Nandakumar, are you ready?
Good afternoon, sir. Yes, sir, I'm ready, sir.
Yeah, you can start, Dr. Nandakumar. Are you able to see?
Yes, sir.
You can start.
So, good afternoon to all. Today, I am going to interpret an ABG which was given to me. And first, we go to the history and physical examination of the patient. So, history is 30-year-old male with uncontrolled hypertension who is requiring up to 3 antihypertensive medications, which includes diuretic to maintain suboptimal blood pressure control. And also, there is a history of early onset hypertension or CVA occurs at young age. And also here a history of a severe muscle weakness, palpitation, fatigue, muscle cramps, polydipsia, and polyuria. And on coming to the physical examination, his BP is 160-100 millimeter of mercury. And the ultrasound examination of the abdomen, which shows mass in the right adrenal gland. So this is the history and physical examination of the patient. So come to the ABG. ABG shows pH of 7.50, PCO2 of 50, PO2 90, basal excess +2, sodium is 145, potassium is 2.4, and the chloride is 90, bicarbonate is 28, and the magnesium is 1.2. So first come to step 1. Step 1, we have to analyze the pH of the patient. So for this patient, the pH is 7.50. So it is increased, which shows alkalemia. So alkalemia is nothing but the hydrogen concentration below the range of 36 nanomoles per liter, or pH will be greater than 7.44. Next come to step 2. In step 2, we have to see the bicarbonate and PCO2 of the patient. So bicarbonate is 28, which is also increased, and PCO2 is 50. So normal PCO2 will be 35. So for this patient, again, this PCO2 is again increased. So when you see finally the both pH, bicarbonate, and PCO2, all three things are increased. So this patient primary disorder is due to rise in the bicarbonate. So that is the one which leads to the alkalemia. So the patient had a metabolic alkalosis. Next is step 3. So first we have to predict the compensation occurs or not. So again, take pH, bicarbonate, and PCO2. So for this metabolic disorder, the compensation is occur in the respiratory system by hypoventilation. So again, we know the expected rise in CO2 will be 0.9 into bicarbonate amount plus 16. So 0.9 into 28 plus 16. So finally, the expected rise in CO2 will be 41.2. So, but we have to check for a mixed disorder. So finally, we have a expected PC of 41.2, but when we compare with our actual PCO2, it is 50. So the compensation, there is over compensation occurs for this patient. So finally we know this metabolic alkalosis also combined with some other conditions which leads to increase in PCO2 above than the expected level. So again, come to serum electrolytes. And electrolytes, sodium is 145, potassium is 2.4, chloride is 90, and magnesium is 1.2. Again, come to the ultrasound examination of the patient. Again, it showed mass in the right adrenal gland. So this patient maybe have a hyperaldosteronism, and also he had a severe hypokalemia. So finally, we come to know this patient have chloride resistant metabolic alkalosis, and also this hypokalemia and hypomagnesemia may be due to the use of diuretics, and also the patient had a maybe they have this hyperaldosteronism, which may leads to polyuria and polydipsia. Thank you. Sir. Hello, sir.
Hello, is there any problem?
Yes, sir. Yes, I finished, sir.
Now, are you able to see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Dr. Apurva, you can start, doctor.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. Good evening, everyone. My topic for discussion will be on metabolic alkalosis, chloride non-responsive type. As said by the previous speaker, metabolic alkalosis is a rise in bicarbonate concentration of more than 26 milliequivalents per liter in extracellular fluid, which is not an adaptive response to hypercapnia. This may result from the loss of hydrogen ions from the ECF, or a gain in bicarbonate ions, or a decrease in the extracellular volume. After there is elevation of bicarbonate levels, the elevated bicarbonate levels are maintained by a reduced bicarbonate filtration or enhanced reabsorption or an impaired secretion. These mechanisms are mainly attributed due to a reduced effective arterial blood volume or a chloride depleted state, which was explained by the previous speaker, and chronic hypokalemia, which leads to increase in bicarbonate reabsorption and decrease the secretion of bicarbonates. And when there is an increased sodium delivery to the distal tubules, it tends to reabsorb more of sodium and enhances potassium and hydrogen ion secretion. This picture depicts the bicarbonate reabsorption and bicarbonate secretion, which was also explained by the previous speaker. One point to highlight is about the pendrin transporter, which is a chloride bicarbonate exchange protein present on the distal tubules on the luminal side. This is present mainly in the bicarbonate metabolic alkalosis, which tends to excrete bicarbonates and causes a reabsorption of chloride. The defect in this pendrin protein may cause a Pendred syndrome. In this disorder, there is a decreased secretion of bicarbonate, which may lead to metabolic alkalosis, and there is loss of chloride. And this Pendred protein is present in the thyroid and even in the inner ear. So these patients may tend to have a renal defect with a thyroid disorder and a sensorineural hearing loss. The classification of metabolic alkalosis is mainly classified as chloride responsive or chloride resistant, depending on the urine chloride concentration. When there is a urine chloride concentration of less than 15 milliequivalents, it is referred to as chloride responsive, which was explained in detail by the previous presenter. And in the chloride resistant type, the main characteristic feature would be a rise in urine chloride concentration of more than 25 milliequivalents per liter. The most important cause would be a rise in mineralocorticoid excess. When there is a rise in aldosterone levels, it tends to absorb more of sodium and water and causes a secretion of potassium and H plus ions instead of sodium ions. So the causes would be primary hyperaldosteronism, where there is a rise in aldosterone levels, and in Liddle syndrome, there is a gain in mutation of the epithelial sodium channels, which tends to reabsorb more of sodium, and exogenous steroid use. The other causes would be Barter's or Gittelman syndrome, where there is mutation in the ion channels. In Bartter syndrome, the mutation is mainly in the sodium potassium 2 chloride transporter present in the loop of Henle, which resembles a loop diuretic. And in Gittelman syndrome, the defect is mainly in the sodium chloride transporter present in the distal convoluted tubules, which resembles a thiazide diuretic. And also exogenous administration of bicarbonates or massive blood transfusion of more than 8 units can cause a rise in bicarbonates, as blood products contain sodium citrates, which tends to get converted into bicarbonates in liver. And in milk alkali syndrome, it is a condition in which milk and absorbable antacids such as calcium carbonate are used to treat peptic ulcer disease patients. In these patients, calcium and bicarbonate are excreted in urine. Thereby, calcium tends to deposit in alkaline urine, thus causing a renal dysfunction and decreased elimination of bicarbonates, leading to metabolic alkalosis. And in severe hypokalemic state, as said earlier, there is increased reabsorption of bicarbonates and reduced secretion. So, a main topic for my discussion would be on primary aldosteronism, the most common cause of mineralocorticoid excess seen in the individuals. It is a non-suppressible hypersecretion of aldosterone, which remains underdiagnosed cause of refractory hypertension in the younger individuals. And aldosterone is secreted from the zona glomerulosa of the adrenal cortex. It is regulated by the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system and the ACTH. ACTH has a minimal effect on aldosterone release. Now moving on to the types of primary aldosteronism, there are two major types, which are bilateral idiopathic hyperplasia, which represents the 60 to 70% of the population, and the other one would be unilateral aldosterone producing adenomas, which is referred to as Conn syndrome. And the other types would be unilateral hyperplasia or familial hyperaldosteronism, which is mutations in various ion channels, and adrenocortical carcinomas and ectopic aldosterone secreting tumors. This represents only about 10% of the population. The main pathophysiology in primary aldosteronism is mainly seen in the renal system. And the primary effect of aldosterone, as said earlier, is it causes a rise in sodium epithelial sodium channels in the luminal side of cortical collecting duct, thereby increasing the sodium reabsorption. This causes the lumen to be electronegative. For this, there is a compensation by direct secretion of potassium by sodium potassium ATPase and direct secretion by the hydrogen ions. When there is a sodium depleted state, a RAS system is activated and there is a release of aldosterone. This causes an increased expression of epithelial sodium channels and sodium potassium ATPase, thereby causing reabsorption of sodium, and there is a net loss of potassium. When there is an influx of sodium into the ECF, there is also simultaneous movement of water into the cells. This causes extracellular volume to expand. Now, following this hypervolemic state, there is spontaneous diuresis seen in these patients after a few days, which is referred to as aldosterone escape. And this is seen mainly in patients after an approximate weight gain of 3 kgs. And the mechanism attributing to aldosterone escape would be a rise in atrial natriuretic peptide due to volume expansion, or a decrease in thiazide sensitive sodium chloride cotransporter, thereby causing a reduced sodium reabsorption and pressure natriuresis. The common mutation seen in aldosterone producing adenomas would be somatic mutations. As said earlier, the familial type would include ion channel mutations, and the most common among them would be a KCN J5 mutation. And these patients tend to have a larger size tumors, and female predominance is seen. In CSC NA1D mutation, the tumor size is smaller, and prevalence is more in older age group. And there is some germline mutation seen in this CAC NA1D mutation, which is a sodium channel mutation, leading to complex severe neuromuscular disorders such as cerebral palsy or neuromotor disorder. And other mutations would be an ATP1A1 and ATP2B3 mutation.
Doctor, we're not able to hear you. Dr. Apurva, we are not able to hear you. Dr. Apurva, we are not able to hear you. Anyone able to hear Dr. Apurva? Before Dr. Apurva can come in, is there any other PG you can say how do you manage Cohen's syndrome or primary hyperaldosteronism?
Hello, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, right now you are audible. You can proceed, Doctor.
Yes, sir. And the lesser variety would include an ATP1A1 and ATP2B mutation with the male predominance and severe hypokalemic state. The main clinical features seen in these patients would be a refractory hypertension and suppression of renin activity. The mean blood pressure in these patients would be 180/110 in adenomas and 160/110 in hyperplasia. And this hypertension requires multiple drug therapy to bring back the BP to normal levels. And hypokalemia is mainly due to direct potassium secretion in the distal tubules by aldosterone activity. And since there is excess sodium and water available in the distal tubules, this is enhanced, potassium secretion is enhanced. And there is also concurrent loss of hydrogen ions leading to metabolic alkalosis. The symptoms seen in these patients would be severe muscle weakness, flaccid paralysis, and muscle spasms. The cardiovascular risks include seen in these patients are independent of the potassium concentration. There is an increase in left ventricular mass and reduced LV function, and these patients are more prone to stroke, MI, and atrial fibrillation. These features are mainly attributed to activation of mineralocorticoid receptors in the heart and blood vessels, leading to an impaired endothelial function, thereby causing vascular remodeling. These vascular remodeling features can be reversed by medical therapy or surgery. Since there is dyslipidemia seen in these patients are more prone to type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome. The renal effects seen in these patients are increase in GFR and renal perfusion pressure, mainly due to renal fibrosis and renal vasculature remodeling, and there is some minimal proteinuria seen in these patients. This can also be reversed by treatment. Due to spontaneous diuresis, there might be a mild hypernatremia and hypomagnesemia. Muscle weakness in these patients begins when the potassium levels fall below 2.5 milliequivalents per liter. This picture shows the adverse effects following aldosterone excess, which includes a vascular endothelial dysfunction, cardiac and vascular fibrosis, leading to acute MI or acute MI or atrial fibrillation. Hypertension, refractory hypertension seen in these patients is mainly due to vascular stiffening and collagen deposition. Dyslipidemias in these patients makes them more prone to obesity, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndromes. And the renal effect would be increased sodium reabsorption and potassium excretion in the distal convoluted tubules. The aldosterone excess causes a sodium retention, causing a rise in blood pressure, leading to oxidative stress and damage to DNA and vascular remodeling, causing atherosclerosis of vasculature, renal fibrosis and proteinuria, leading to chronic renal dysfunction and stroke in CNS, and left ventricular hypertrophy fibrosis, leading to acute coronary syndrome or atrial fibrillation. When there is a suspicion of refractory hypertension and severe hypokalemia in younger individuals, diagnosis of primary aldosteronism is made mainly by measuring the plasma renin activity and plasma aldosterone concentrations. In these patients, due to rise in aldosterone, there is a suppression of renin activity. So there is a fall in plasma renin activity of less than 1 nanogram per deciliter and a rise in plasma aldosterone concentration of more than 15 nanogram per deciliter, and thereby there is a increase in ratio of aldosterone to renin of more than 20. When this is confirmed, confirmatory tests for primary aldosteronism are made. On the other side, when there is an increase in renin activity, an increase in aldosterone concentrations, and the ratio is less than 10, investigations for secondary aldosteronisms are made. Mainly, this spectrum includes renal arterial stenosis or renovascular hypertension, renin secreting tumors or reninomas, or malignant hypertension, coarctation of aorta, and diuretic use. When the aldosterone renin ratio is more than 20, some confirmatory tests for primary aldosteronisms are done. This includes oral sodium loading test or saline infusion test, where the patient in oral sodium loading test are said to have a sodium diet of 5000 milligram per day for 3 days, following which aldosterone levels are measured. Normally, in normal individuals, there should be a fall in aldosterone levels following a sodium intake. But in these patients, the aldosterone levels remain unchanged. In saline infusion test, where high sodium intake diet is not possible, IV infusion of sodium chloride 0.9%, 2 liters over 4 hours is done, and aldosterone levels are measured after 1 hour. In fludrocortisone suppression test, fludrocortisone at 0.1 to 0.2 mg per kg for every 6 hours is given, and suppression for aldosterone levels are seen. When there is no change in aldosterone levels and there is more than 15 nanogram per deciliter, primary aldosteronism is the diagnosis. And when captopril challenge test, captopril, an ACE inhibitor, is given, so that this causes a decrease in renin activity and a fall in aldosterone levels. But in these patients of primary aldosteronism, this doesn't occur and there is no change in aldosterone levels. Once the diagnosis of primary aldosteronism is made, adrenal CT is performed. So next slide, sir. When adrenal CT is performed mainly to localize the site of adrenal tumors. When the CT scan shows a unilateral mass of more than 4 centimeter, carcinoma should be suspected. In case of unilateral hypodense nodule of more than 1 centimeter and less than 2 centimeter, unilateral hyperplasia is considered. And if surgery is not desired, medical therapy with mineralocorticoid antagonists such as spironolactone is preferred. When the surgery is desired and in patients more than 35 years, an adrenal vein sampling is done to lateralize the site of tumor. Adrenal venous sampling is nothing but blood samples from adrenal veins are taken so that the disease side would have a fourfold rise in aldosterone than the opposite side. And in case of a normal adrenal CT or micronodularity or bilateral thickening, bilateral hyperplasia is made out. And in these cases, mostly medical therapy is preferred. If surgery is desired, adrenal vein sampling should be done. And the most common surgery in these patients would be an laparoscopic adrenalectomy. So, moving on to the anesthetic implications in Conn syndrome. Most probably, it would be a unilateral adenoma and unilateral laparoscopic adrenalectomy would be done in these patients. The preoperative evaluation for these patients must be carefully carried out as they might be in a volume depleted or hypervolemic state. So, orthostatic hypotension, rise in heart rate, and fall in BP should be made out to diagnose hypovolemic states, and appropriate correction should be given. And electrolytes such as hypomagnesemia, hypokalemia should be corrected pre-operatively by potassium infusions or potassium sachets. And for controlling hypertension, multiple antihypertensives such as beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, and the mainstay of treatment would be spironolactone, which is an aldosterone antagonist, and 50 to 100 mg per OD is given prior to surgery. And since spironolactone takes some 2 weeks to restore the normal electrolytes and hypertension, other treatment would be salt restricted diet, potassium correction, and antihypertensives. Cardiac function should be evaluated pre-operatively as there might be a decrease in LV function leading to hypotension and bradycardia intraoperatively. So next slide, sir. So these patients coming for laparoscopic adrenalectomy, the choice of anesthesia would be epidural with an GA. So intraoperative implications would be aldosterone levels are not altered by the choice of sedatives or inducing agents, but etomidate must be avoided as it interferes with the cortisol levels. Neuromuscular monitoring for muscle relaxation should be necessary as metabolic alkalosis and hypokalemia prolongs the action of muscle relaxants. And metabolic alkalosis is seen in these patients, and hyperventilation should be avoided for hemodynamic fluctuations. And frequent ABG analysis during the intraoperative period is mandatory as there might be changes in potassium levels and metabolic alkalosis leading to hemodynamic impairment. While handling the adrenals, there might be a release of catecholamines and hypertensive crisis is expected. So, careful monitoring, and when hypertensive crisis occurs, NTG infusions can be started. In cortisol supplementation is not necessary in all the cases, but in bilateral multinodular hyperplasias, cortisol supplementation is necessary as it might cause a mild hypoaldosteronism state. And in the post-operative period, care must be taken to monitor the potassium and glucose levels as chronic potassium depleted state may cause insulin resistance and cause glucose intolerance in these patients. With this information on primary aldosteronism, I would like to conclude my topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Apurva, for an excellent presentation.
Thank you, sir.
I've given this particular topic is a couple of I've been an external examiner for many universities. Couple of universities where they're fond of asking this laparoscopic adrenalectomy for Cons syndrome, where they specifically something like what previously we used as osteochromocytoma preparation. Now they have started using this, asking this Cons disease. So that is the reason why I put this particular topic for discussion today, so that you will not be surprised in the examination. Now the podium is open. I want the participants to participate freely. Most important thing is participation. You participate, ask your question. This is not a didactic lecture. This is a self-directed learning. Unless you all prepare and contribute, you will not be able to learn. So myself and Dr. Kamakshi have finished all these things. It is your turn. So now you will have to learn. We are not here to teach you each and everything. So if you discuss, it will be easy for you to learn and understand. So the podium is with you. You'll have to start utilizing. I request the participants to participate.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, how severe hypokalemia causes chloride-resistant metabolic alkalosis?
No, hypokalemia doesn't produce. The pathophysiology in this process produces a loss of potassium.
Yes.
And one positive goes out and negative goes in. Negative goes along with the positive. So two positives cannot enter. So if sodium is going to get absorbed, or either hydrogen has to go out, because two positives cannot go together. So hypokalemia is not the cause of metabolic alkalosis. It is one of the byproduct of metabolic alkalosis.
Yes, sir.
I want you all to go and read the physiology in the kidney, physiology of proximal convoluted tubule, Henle's loop, and distal convoluted tubule. Because so much of physiology is there that will interact with you whenever you can give anesthesia for an adult, more of an adult than its pediatric patient. Because all your hypertension, everything, there is going to be some kind of a problem, either an acid-base problem or an electrolyte problem, or volume, under volume or a hyper volume. So you should know in detail about renal physiology. One of the most pathetic situations is we don't have a first part on the first year. We have been fighting with the university. Hope we'll get one day, because the first part is very important. If you take Miller Volume 1, it goes into depth of physiology. What Professor Pawar of All India Institute, one of my good friend, used to say is anesthesia is nothing but 3 P's: physiology, pharmacology, and physics. If you know all these things, and if you are able to combine these things, you can give a safe anesthesia. Any more questions? Okay, if there are no more questions, next Saturday the class will be on respiratory acidosis. Please come prepared for respiratory acidosis. Okay, you have to ask them about what is the settings or ventilator settings they might keep or you want to keep. Okay, so I want some kind of a discussion. I don't want to give didactic lecture. Okay, there's no place for didactic lecture anymore. I can take lecture for 2 hours. That is totally different. Okay, this group or SDL or self-directed learning group is meant for you all to interact. You all are coming from different institutions, and you have so many teachers. You could have learned so many things. You can interact. When you interact, you will learn so many things. We are just here only as a mediator, so that we want all of you to join together, learn together. Okay. So if there are no more questions, Dr. Kamakshi, any comments?
Yes, sir. It was a wonderful session today, sir, and I fully agree with you. This session is fully interactive session. This is meant only for active interaction by all the participants.
Because we have crossed that stage. It is for them to learn. What they don't seem to understand is, unless you interact, it is very difficult to retain them in your brain. You cannot mug anesthesia, and you cannot learn anesthesia by didactic lectures. So that is the reason why I stopped giving didactic lectures. I have gone more in favor of these discussion groups. Okay? If there are no more questions, I think we'll wind up today. So we'll meet next Saturday on respiratory acidosis. So we'll have an ABG session followed by 2 topics on respiratory acidosis, maybe ventilation. I don't know what they're going to select. So we'll talk in detail about 2 causes for respiratory acidosis and how they are managed. It will be more of practical, plus all the 4 topics: metabolic acidosis, metabolic alkalosis, respiratory acidosis, and respiratory alkalosis. You cannot write an MD exam without knowing all these things. It will come in any of the 4 papers, or if you miss that, definitely it will come in the afternoon session of your clinical examination. So with that, I'd like to thank all the participants. Thank you very much. See you next week. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.